The morning sun cast long shadows across Denver International Airport's massive terminal as a petite Asian woman in her early 30s made her way through the sliding doors. She wore faded blue jeans, a simple gray sweater that had clearly seen better days, and carried a worn-out carry-on bag with a broken wheel that squeaked persistently against the polished floor. Despite her humble appearance, there was something striking about her presence, a quiet confidence in her walk, a certain grace in how she carried herself. But today, fatigue lined her face as she checked her phone for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Another delay, she muttered to herself, scrolling through urgent messages. Her private jet had developed unexpected mechanical issues during a routine check, forcing her to book a last-minute commercial flight. The timing couldn't have been worse. She had a crucial business meeting in New York that could potentially revolutionize clean energy access in developing nations. Making her way to the first-class counter, she pulled out her platinum credit card. The ticketing agent raised an eyebrow but processed the transaction professionally. However, their interaction caught the attention of the airport manager, who had been observing from his nearby post. He watched as she purchased one of the most expensive first-class tickets available, his suspicion growing with each passing moment. The contrast between her appearance and the $12,000 transaction set off what he considered to be red flags. Walking over to the counter, the manager, a tall man with graying temples and an air of authority developed over 2 decades of airport service, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, could you step aside for a moment? We need to verify some information." The woman looked up from her phone, where she'd been typing out instructions to her team about the change in travel plans. Her expression remained neutral, though a flicker of recognition crossed her face. She'd encountered such situations before. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly, her voice carrying a slight accent that hinted at her international background. The manager's eyes narrowed as he studied her driver's license and credit card. Everything appeared legitimate, but something about the situation didn't sit right with him. Perhaps it was her scuffed sneakers, or maybe the way she seemed unbothered by spending such a large sum. It didn't match his preconceptions of a first-class passenger. Little did he know, his next few decisions would not only go viral on social media, but would also spark a nationwide conversation about prejudice and assumptions in public spaces. The quiet morning at Denver International was about to become anything but ordinary. Around them, early morning travelers hurried past, some slowing down to observe the unusual scene unfolding at the first-class counter. A few pulled out their phones, sensing that something noteworthy was about to happen. The woman stood patiently, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the manager's growing agitation. The squeaking wheel of her carry-on bag filled the awkward silence as she shifted her weight, checking the time on her phone once again. Behind her professional composure, precious minutes were ticking away. Minutes that could affect thousands of lives depending on the outcome of her New York meeting. The airport manager led the woman to a small office just off the main terminal, his shoes clicking against the floor with each determined step. The space was cramped, filled with the hum of an old desktop computer and the artificial scent of pine air freshener trying to mask the staleness of recycled air. "Please, take a seat," he said, though his tone made it sound more like an order than an invitation. The woman remained standing, her worn carry-on bag still by her side. Through the office's glass window, curious onlookers began to gather, their morning routines momentarily forgotten. "I've been managing this airport for 15 years, he began, shuffling through her documents with exaggerated scrutiny. "And something about this situation doesn't add up. A last-minute first-class ticket purchased with a platinum card." He paused, looking pointedly at her simple clothing. The woman took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "I understand you're doing your job, but I have a flight to catch. Every document I've provided is legitimate." "That's exactly what everyone says," he responded, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Do you know how many scam attempts we catch every week?" He held her credit card up to the light, turning it over as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. By now, a small crowd had formed outside. Among them was a young flight attendant who kept squinting at the woman, her face scrunched in concentration as if trying to remember something important. She whispered to her colleague, pointing at her phone. Inside the office, the manager's questioning grew more confrontational. How did you acquire this credit card? The address listed here is for a penthouse in Manhattan. His eyebrows rose with obvious disbelief. That's my residence, she replied simply, checking her watch. The meeting in New York was growing more distant with each passing minute. Billions in potential funding for renewable energy projects hung in the balance, but she couldn't reveal that without compromising ongoing negotiations. A security officer hovered near the door, called over by the manager's earlier subtle gesture. The woman noticed but showed no sign of concern. She'd faced prejudice before, though usually not quite so blatantly. Your driver's license photo, the manager continued, it seems different. He glanced from the ID to her face repeatedly, ignoring the fact that the photo was merely taken on a day when she dressed more formally. Her phone buzzed again. Another urgent message about the New York meeting. As she reached for it, the manager's hand shot out. Please don't touch your phone until we've resolved this situation. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. The young flight attendant was now showing something on her phone to her colleagues, their eyes widening in recognition. But inside the office, the manager remained oblivious to the revelation that was about to unfold. Perhaps we should call your bank, he suggested, his tone making it clear he expected this threat to make her nervous. Instead, she nodded calmly. Feel free to call them. While you're at it, you might want to check today's financial news. Her voice remained steady, but a hint of something, perhaps amusement, flickered in her eyes. Just then, her phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID displayed Chief of Operations, Denver International. The manager's face twitched as he noticed the screen, but he wasn't ready to back down yet. The morning sun now streamed fully through the office windows, illuminating the absurdity of the situation. Here was one of the most influential business leaders in the world, being held in a small airport office because she didn't match someone's prejudiced idea of success. The situation in the small airport office was reaching a boiling point. Through the glass walls, dozens of travelers had stopped to watch, many with phones raised, recording every moment of the unfolding drama. The morning light caught their curious faces as they pressed closer, whispering among themselves. A senior flight attendant pushed through the growing crowd, knocking softly on the office door. Sir, she called to the manager, her voice urgent. I think there's something you should know. Not now, he snapped, waving her away without turning around. We're handling a security situation here. The woman in the simple gray sweater stood quietly, watching as her phone lit up with another incoming call. The screen displayed UN Secretary General's office. The manager's eyes widened slightly at the caller ID, but he quickly masked his surprise with another frown. More elaborate props won't help your case, he said, though a hint of uncertainty had crept into his voice. We deal with all sorts of sophisticated schemes here. Outside, the crowd had grown even larger. A businessman in an expensive suit was showing something on his tablet to those around him, pointing at the woman through the glass. People's expressions changed from curiosity to shock as they looked from their screens to the simple-dressed woman in the office. I understand you're trying to protect the airport, the woman said calmly, but you're making assumptions based on how I'm dressed. Would you be doing this if I were wearing designer clothes? Before the manager could respond, another airport staff member rushed in, slightly out of breath. Sir, the chief of operations is on his way down. He's asking why his calls aren't being answered. The woman's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert. Tech Billionaire's revolutionary solar project set to transform global energy access. Press conference delayed due to travel issues. Several people in the crowd outside gasped audibly, pointing at their own phones. The news was spreading rapidly across social media platforms. Someone had already posted a video of the confrontation, and it was gaining thousands of views by the minute. The young flight attendant who had tried to intervene earlier was now showing her phone to her colleagues. On the screen was a recent magazine cover featuring the same woman, though dressed in business attire, standing in front of a massive solar energy facility. The headline read, "The Future of Clean Energy: How One Woman's Vision is Changing the World." Inside the office, the tension continued to mount. The woman's carry-on bag still squeaked occasionally as she shifted her weight, the mundane sound a strange counterpoint to the extraordinary situation. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications, each one making the manager more uncomfortable than the last. "Perhaps we should wait for the chief of operations," the security officer suggested quietly to the manager, having noticed the growing crowd and their reactions. The morning sun now filled the office completely, making the beads of sweat on the manager's forehead clearly visible. The woman glanced at her watch again. The meeting in New York was slipping further away with each passing minute. Billions in potential funding hung in the balance, along with the hopes of millions who could benefit from affordable clean energy. Just then, a distinguished-looking man in a suit burst through the crowd, his face flushed with urgency. Behind him, two more men in business attire followed, their expressions grave. The chief of operations had arrived, and from his face, it was clear he knew exactly who was being detained in his airport. The small office suddenly felt even smaller. The morning that had started with a simple case of prejudice was about to transform into something that would make headlines across the globe. The chief of operations burst into the small office, his presence immediately filling the cramped space. The morning sun caught his silver hair as he quickly assessed the situation, his face shifting from concern to dismay as he recognized the woman in the simple gray sweater. "Madam," he said, slightly out of breath, "I cannot begin to express my apologies." He turned to the manager, whose face had begun to pale. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Before anyone could answer, two more people entered the office. The first was a well-dressed man carrying a leather briefcase who immediately went to the woman's side. "I came as soon as I tracked your location," he said quietly. "The board members are waiting for updates about the New York meeting." The second person, a distinguished-looking woman in a business suit, was already on her phone. "Yes, we'll need to reschedule the UN presentation." "No, she's been delayed at Denver International." She paused, listening. "No, you won't believe what happened." The airport manager stood frozen, his earlier confidence evaporating as he watched the scene unfold. Through the glass walls, the crowd had grown even larger. Phones were recording every moment, and social media was exploding with real-time updates. "This is my executive assistant," the woman in the sweater explained calmly, gesturing to the man with the briefcase. "And my head of communications," she added, nodding toward the woman on the phone. "They were supposed to meet me in New York, but it seems we're all having an unexpected morning." The chief of operations wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "She's the founder and CEO of the world's largest sustainable energy company," he explained to the manager, whose face had now lost all color. "Her solar technology projects are revolutionizing power access in developing nations." Someone in the crowd outside pressed their phone against the glass. On the screen was a video of the same woman, though dressed formally, giving a TED talk about renewable energy solutions. The view count showed millions. "I tried to tell you earlier," the young flight attendant called from the doorway. "I recognized her from the in-flight magazine. She's on the cover of this month's issue." The executive assistant pulled out his tablet, displaying multiple headlines from major news outlets. "Tech pioneers $50 billion clean energy initiative set to launch." "Global leader in sustainable technology to announce major breakthrough." "Fortune 500's youngest self-made billionaire tackles climate crisis." The woman's phone buzzed yet again. This time, it was a message from the New York Stock Exchange. They were waiting for her to ring the opening bell remotely, a ceremony planned to coincide with her company's latest public offering. The meeting in New York, she finally explained, her voice still surprisingly gentle, was meant to finalize a deal that would bring affordable solar power to over 100 million people. She glanced at her watch. We were announcing a breakthrough in energy storage technology that could transform how we power our world. The crowd outside had grown so large that airport security had to create a pathway for travelers to reach their gates. People were sharing the video of the confrontation, adding their own stories of being judged by their appearance. The manager looked down at the platinum credit card he still held in his trembling hands, then at the worn carry-on bag with its squeaky wheel. The contrast that had triggered his suspicions now seemed to mock his prejudices. The truth spread through the airport terminal like wildfire. Passengers waiting at nearby gates were sharing the video of the confrontation, which had already gone viral on multiple social media platforms. The hashtag #Don'tJudgeYourBeAppearance was trending, with thousands of shares every minute. A teenager in the crowd held up her phone, showing a Forbes magazine article to those around her. "Look," she exclaimed. "She's worth over $47 billion. She started her company in her garage with just an idea about making solar panels more efficient. Now she's revolutionizing how the whole world uses energy." Another passenger pulled up a documentary clip showing the woman speaking at a global climate conference. In it, she wore an elegant business suit, but her face was unmistakably the same as the person standing in the cramped airport office in her simple sweater and jeans. Her company just built the world's largest solar farm in the desert, someone else shared. They figured out how to store solar energy for weeks without losing power. It's going to change everything. The executive assistant was still fielding calls, his voice growing more urgent. "The World Bank representatives are waiting in New York. Yes, the $30 billion funding initiative. No, we're dealing with an unexpected situation in Denver." The woman's phone displayed another incoming call, this time from the Prime Minister of a European nation. The airport manager watched in stunned silence as she declined yet another world leader's call because of his actions. Through the glass walls, more people were sharing stories they'd found online about her humanitarian work. She donated her entire first year's salary to build schools in rural areas. One person read aloud, "And look, her company provides free solar panels to hospitals in developing countries." The chief of operations was now reading a breaking news alert from his tablet. Global markets await tech leaders' breakthrough announcement. Stock trading volume surges in anticipation. A group of school children on a field trip recognized her from their science textbooks. Their teacher explained how this woman's innovations in solar technology were already being taught in schools as an example of world-changing discoveries. The head of communications finally ended her phone call and turned to address the situation. "The international press is picking up the story. BBC, CNN, and others are requesting statements. They want to know why one of the world's most influential technology leaders was held for questioning over a first-class ticket." Inside the office, the woman remained remarkably composed, though her eyes kept darting to her watch. Each passing minute meant delay for a project that could bring electricity to millions of homes. Her worn sneakers and simple clothes suddenly seemed to carry a powerful message about staying grounded despite enormous success. The crowd outside had grown so large that additional airport security officers arrived to maintain order. People were sharing more than just news articles now. They were posting their own stories of being prejudged based on appearance, turning the incident into a powerful conversation about bias in everyday life. The atmosphere in the small airport office had shifted dramatically. Where tension had once filled the air, there was now an uncomfortable silence. The manager stood by his desk, his earlier confidence replaced by visible regret as the full impact of his actions became clear. The woman in the simple gray sweater finally broke the silence. Her voice remained as calm as it had been throughout the entire ordeal. "You know," she said, looking directly at the manager, "this isn't really about me or my net worth. The chief of operations started to apologize again, but she raised her hand gently to stop him. What happened here today happens to people everywhere, every day. They just don't all have viral videos or news coverage to highlight their stories. Through the glass walls, the crowd had grown quieter, straining to hear her words. Phones were still recording, capturing every moment of what was becoming a powerful lesson in humility and prejudice. I chose to wear these clothes today because they're comfortable for a long flight, she continued, gesturing to her worn sweater and jeans. But the real question is, why should anyone's worth be judged by what they're wearing? The executive assistant had stopped taking calls, his tablet forgotten in his hands as he listened. Even the head of communications had paused her crisis management efforts, recognizing that something more important than damage control was unfolding. Every day, brilliant minds are overlooked because they don't fit someone's idea of what success looks like. Every day, people with incredible potential are judged by their appearance rather than their abilities. She glanced at her squeaky carry-on bag and smiled slightly. This bag? It's been with me since I started my company. It reminds me of where I came from. The airport manager's eyes were fixed on the floor, unable to meet her gaze. Outside, people were nodding in agreement, some wiping away tears as her words struck home. The morning sun streaming through the windows seemed to underscore the authenticity of the moment. Instead of filing complaints or demanding apologies, she continued, I have a different proposal. She turned to the chief of operations. What if we use this moment to create real change? Not just here, but as an example for other places where snap judgments affect people's lives. The young flight attendant who had first recognized her was now standing in the doorway, her eyes bright with admiration. Other airport staff had gathered too, their faces showing a mix of embarrassment and hope. Social media was exploding with supportive messages. The incident that could have been another viral moment of public shaming was transforming into something unexpected. A catalyst for positive change. The woman reached down to adjust her squeaky carry-on bag, the sound somehow perfect for the moment. Sometimes, she said, our biggest mistakes can lead to our most important learning opportunities. The question is, what are we going to do with this opportunity? The airport's main conference room buzzed with activity as the woman stood at the podium, her simple gray sweater now a powerful symbol of the morning's events. The chief of operations sat nearby, alongside other airport executives who had rushed to handle the situation. I'd like to fund a comprehensive training program, she announced, her voice clear and determined. Not just about avoiding discrimination, but about understanding the human cost of snap judgments. The squeaky wheel of her carry-on bag punctuated her words as she moved it aside. The room was packed with airport staff, many standing along the walls. The manager who had started this whole incident sat in the front row, his expression a mix of shame and growing understanding. My company will cover all costs, she continued. But more importantly, we'll work together to create something meaningful. This isn't about pointing fingers, it's about creating real change. Her executive assistant was already pulling up preliminary budget figures on his tablet. We can have the program ready to launch within a month, he said, showing the numbers to the airport executives. Their eyes widened at the generous funding proposal. Through the conference room windows, cameras flashed as news crews gathered outside. The story had evolved from a viral moment of prejudice into something unexpected, a story of transformation and hope. Each employee will receive paid time for the training, she explained. We'll bring in experts in unconscious bias, but also people who've experienced discrimination firsthand. Real stories, real experiences, real change. The head of communications was live tweeting the meeting, and responses were pouring in from airports worldwide, asking to implement similar programs. What had started as one manager's mistake was sparking a global conversation about prejudice in public spaces. The young flight attendant who had first recognized her raised her hand. Could we include stories from passengers too? We see so many people being judged unfairly, but we don't always know how to help. The woman smiled warmly. Exactly. This program will give everyone tools to speak up when they see something wrong. It's not just about avoiding mistakes. It's about actively creating a better environment. Outside, the morning sun had risen fully, casting a bright light through the windows. The woman's phone buzzed again. The New York meeting participants were still waiting. But somehow, this unexpected detour felt more important than any business deal. Sometimes the best opportunities come from our biggest mistakes, she said, looking directly at the manager. Today's incident was unfortunate, but what we do next could help thousands of people feel more welcomed and respected in public spaces. The room erupted in applause, not the polite kind that comes from obligation, but the genuine appreciation that comes when people recognize a moment of real change. 6 months had passed since that memorable morning at Denver International Airport. The terminal buzzed with excitement as a crowd gathered for the graduation ceremony of the first class of airport staff completing the new training program. The same woman who had sparked this change stood at the podium, though today she wore a business suit instead of her gray sweater. Her familiar carry-on bag, still squeaking, sat beside her, now a beloved symbol of the transformation that had taken place. When I walked into this airport 6 months ago, she began, I never imagined that a moment of prejudice would lead to something so powerful. The audience, filled with airport staff wearing their graduation pins, listened intently. In the front row sat the airport manager who had started it all. His face showed the journey he'd been through, from suspicion to shame, and finally to understanding. He held his graduation certificate tightly, proud of the changes he'd helped create. This program has already trained over 500 staff members, the woman continued. But more importantly, it's changed how we think about judgment and bias in public spaces. She gestured to a wall of testimonials behind her, where travelers and staff had shared their stories of transformation. The young flight attendant who had first recognized her now stood as a program trainer, teaching others about the importance of speaking up when they witnessed unfair treatment. Her original viral video of the incident had become a teaching tool, shown in airports across the country. Today, we're not just celebrating your graduation, the woman said, smiling at the crowd. We're celebrating every person who will feel more welcomed in this airport because of what you've learned. The morning sun streamed through the terminal windows, highlighting the diverse faces in the audience. The airport manager stood up, walking slowly to the podium. His voice shook slightly as he spoke. 6 months ago, I made a terrible mistake. I judged someone based on their appearance, and I was completely wrong. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But instead of anger, I was shown understanding. Instead of punishment, I was given an opportunity to learn and grow. Cameras flashed as he turned to face the woman. Your response to my prejudice didn't just change me. It's changing airports everywhere. We've had requests from 30 different countries to implement similar programs. What happened that morning was my biggest professional mistake, but it led to the most important learning experience of my life. The crowd erupted in applause. Social media was already buzzing with updates about the ceremony, but this time, the viral story was about transformation and hope. The hashtag changing airports trended worldwide, carrying messages about the power of turning mistakes into opportunities for growth. As the ceremony concluded, the woman picked up her squeaky carry-on bag. She refused to replace it, saying its imperfections reminded her of the beauty of growth and change. The sound echoed through the terminal, but now it carried a different meaning. It was no longer the sound of prejudice being confronted, but of progress being celebrated.